We are Corrit. Members, you're very welcome this morning. Just remind all members, electronic devices should be switched off, excluding the tablet devices you're using to view your committee pack.
Thomas.
Members, we have quite a full agenda today. The committee will consider a proposal to make a statutory rule relating to the repayment of student loans. The committee will receive a briefing from the Assembly Research and Information Service on post-school special education need provision and education, employment and training for those with learning disabilities. The Department will provide the committee with an update on review of initial teacher education infrastructure. The Department will also brief the committee on the proposed Work and Families Bill. And finally, the committee will be briefed by NISRA officials on the labour force survey. Members, apologies. Apologies I have at the minute are David McClarty and Phil Flanagan. Are there any other apologies? Okay, members. Chairperson's business, just to advise members that the deadline for the call of the submissions for our post-SEN inquiry was last Friday. A number of organisations have asked for an extension and this has been granted. A list of all the organisations and individuals that have responded has been tabled. Members, they're in your packs, they're table papers at page 3, so you can just have a look around to see who has submitted at this stage. Included in the list are the page numbers for where members can find the submissions on the inquiry folder on SharePoint. And I think Johnny's everybody set up on their tablets for that. Members, just could I seek agreement at this stage to publish the submissions on the committee website at this stage, because by the time we get into evidence sessions and all the rest of it, it could be quite a while, so it might be advantageous actually publishing. Okay, members, just then also tabled at page 5, just advise members that NIACRO has asked the committee to host the next Justice Seminar event, which will focus on the issue affecting young people who are not in education, employment or training. And the event is scheduled to take place on the 6th of May in room 115, Barnum Buildings. Professor Robin Simmons will give the seminar entitled Inclusion, Exclusion or Marginalisation and Understanding the Lived Experience of Neat Young People. Members agreed?
Chair, with your permission, sorry, on the inquiry we're taking place, is it possible to give consideration for a study visit to Foylview Special School? Foylview Special School on the Belmont Estate in my own constituency.
That's good. Yep. Members contend we add that, yeah? Okay, members, draft minutes of our last meeting on the 12th of March are in your packet, page 8. Members agreed? Those are a minute of the last meeting? Agreed. Agreed. Okay, I'll sign them as correct. Members, matters arising are at point 17 of the packs. Just agreed action points from the last committee meeting. There's nothing really there of significance, members, unless you have anything. Just agreed matters as noted.
That's noted.
Okay, members, moving on to correspondence, page 23 of your packs and also tabled. Members, at page 27 is the response from the University and the College Union regarding the proposed industrial action at Queen's University of Belfast and University of Ulster. Members content to note?
Okay.
Okay. Members, at page 98 is the response from the Department of Education regarding our careers, education and information advice and guidance. Inquiring members, basically they are saying that they've taken our recommendation under consideration again and they are willing to look at it, so there's positive. Happy enough, members? Okay, members, page 293 is correspondence from the staff in South West College highlighting issues of concern at South West College. Members, this would actually come under sort of whistleblowing regulations and standards, so normal procedure would be to forward that to the Public Accounts Committee, so yep. Members content to note? Yep. Content to forward? Okay, members, thank you. Members, page 295 is correspondence from the Students' Orange Society requesting to brief the committee on its concerns regarding the environment at the University of Ulster. Members, it may be a while before we could actually schedule them in. Would you be content that maybe the Deputy Chair and I meet them first?
Do no harm, yeah.
Bronwyn?
Chair, I would like to make a recommendation that myself and Fra also attend that meeting, given the nature of the complaints.
That's fine.
We always do it when it's a chair and deputy chair, that it's any interested member can attend as well, and we always
Okay.
notify all members when the meeting's been
That's
scheduled.
right.
If we do that first as a
That's
sort of
fine.
informal lead in and then see where we're...
That's
Chair,
fine.
normally, I believe in occasions like this, that the first course and anything would be to go through the structures, either the university structures or the students' union. Has that been done in this?
As far as I am led to be aware, I think they have, but they've written to us as well, so to me, just that's
Didn't see
why
anywhere in the letter that it said that already.
we can clarify that.
Please.
Do no harm, yeah.
The sort of the chair and deputy chair, or sorry, the deputy chair and myself meet them with any other interested members as well. We can set that up and then follow on if it needs to come in front of the full committee. Okay, members, all other items agreed, actions as suggested agreed unless indications to the contrary on correspondence. Okay, members, thank you. Members, invitations, we've 4 invitations in front of us at the minute. Page 307 of the pack is an invitation from Duncairn Centre for Culture and Arts to attend the launch of its new centre on the 1st of May at the new centre in Duncairn Gardens, Belfast. All members are invited to that, so if you are going to let the clerk know. Members, at page 309 is an invitation forwarded by Colin Nealons, the Director of WEA, to the International Learning Times Conference promoting the EU Agenda for Adult Learning, 12th to the 14th of May at the Hilton Edinburgh Grosvenor Hotel in Edinburgh. All members are invited, but it's not something we had in the committee programme, so it's not something we'll be attending formally. Are you content? Okay, members, page 318 is an invitation from Now to attend the Northern Ireland Money for Life Challenge final on the 9th of April in the Long Gallery at 5 p.m. All members are invited. Members, also then in your table packs at page 17 is an invitation from the Committee of the Office of the First and Deputy First Minister to attend a lunch event for a delegation from the European Economic and Social Committee, mark the occasion of the enlarged presidency on the 3rd of April in the members' dining room, Parliament buildings. Remember, it was an invitation just to the chair, but it's just to know our deputy chair,
Fair enough.
if I can. Okay, members, just then, draft forward work programme is at page 322 of your pack. Members, the draft forward work programme is there until the 23rd of April, which takes us up to Easter. Other briefings may be scheduled as they arise, and just take into consideration Pat's request earlier on as well. Just advise members that the Minister has requested to brief the committee on the structures to deliver success and how the various strategies come together to meet the Department's objectives. And this briefing has been scheduled for the 9th of April. 9th of April. Members agreed? Okay, members. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair, there was an event this morning that the number of members of this committee hosted. It was the older persons report on economic value of older people, and I had suggested, because I was speaking very briefly at it, that it would do no harm getting a briefing from the Older Persons Commissioner regarding their themes, their objectives in terms of ensuring that older people, as the ageing population increases, what training is available for them, what employment opportunities and what learning opportunities is there. It's certainly a very good subject matter, something that we haven't really been talking about here, but certainly I would believe it would be worthwhile just to do that.
I was there myself, and Chris was there at that stage too. It was a very good event. The reports launched this morning has been on the radio. Their formal recommendations are taken form. Members, are you content that we schedule that in the forward work programme? Okay. Thank you, members. Okay, members, anything else in the work programme? No? Moving on then, item agenda 7 is the Statutory Rule 2014-87, Education Student Loans Repayment Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2014. Members, it's page 324 of the pack. Members, the Department has laid a statutory rule on the 19th of March. The Education Student Loans Repayment Regulations 2009 provides a statutory framework for the collection and repayment of student loans. For most borrowers, repayment is through the tax system. involving employers and HMRC and administered by the Student Loans Company. The amendments, which are minor and technical in nature, amend the real-time information which was rolled out in April 2013. The amendment introduces penalties for employers who deliberately make an incorrect return on or after the 6th of April. The second amendment under the Finance Act 2013, which allows an officer of the Revenue and Customs to make adjustments to counteract tax advantages, will deem a borrower has automatically received notification about the making of a tax adjustment. The amendments are also being made across a number of pieces of United Kingdom taxation legislation. The statute rule is subject to negative resolution and is due to come into operation on the 6th of April 2014. The committee considered the proposal to make the statute rule at its meeting on the 5th of February and agreed that it was content with the proposed statute rule. There has been no change to the policy content since the proposal was submitted. The Department has breached the Assembly's 21-day rule in respect of this statute rule and has written to the Examiner of Statute Rules to explain that as the rule is made in equivalence with regulations made by the UK Department of Business, Innovation and Skills, it had to wait for the final English regulations to come through and had to come into operation on the 6th of April. The Examiner of Statute Rules has noted the Department's explanation and has no points to raise on this rule. Are members content with the rule?
Yep.
Okay, members, if you are content, that the Committee for Employment and Learning has considered SR 2014-87, the Education Student Loans Repayment Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2014, and has no objection to the rule. Okay, members, content? Members, point 8 then, or item 8 of our agenda is the committee inquiry into post-special education need provision in education, employment and training for those with learning disabilities. And we have a briefing from the Assembly Research and Information Service. Members, this session will be hand-sorted, so just remind you of your electronic devices. The two raised papers are at page 335 and 349, and just welcome me in for Owen. On this morning. Owen, you're very welcome, and asked you just to speak to the two papers. Thank you.
Thanks. Excuse me. This briefing is on two papers written for the current committee inquiry. The papers cover the post-secondary provision for people with special education needs in Northern Ireland and examples of models of support for people with learning disabilities who have left the secondary school system. As per the remit of the committee inquiry, both papers focus on training, skills development and employment for people with learning disabilities and on the support provided. Due to the size of the papers, I'm just going to cover a broad overview of the contents. And would the committee like me to pause at the end of the first paper?
If you could,
questions?
Owen, I'll be on the
Yeah. In Northern Ireland, special education needs are defined as when a child has a learning difficulty which calls for special education provision to be made for it. In turn, a child is defined as having a learning difficulty if he or she finds it harder to learn than most children of the same age or has a disability which makes it difficult to use the educational facilities in the area. Children in Northern Ireland who have SEN are assessed on their need on a 5-stage continuum. This ranges from stage 1, where teachers identify and register a child's special educational needs, consult the school's SEN coordinator and then takes initial action. And stage 5, where the local education and library board considers the need for a statement of special education needs and, if necessary, will subsequently arrange, monitor and review provision to meet that child's individual needs. Pupils who remain in school after the age of 16 are the responsibility of the education and library boards until the end of the term in which they turn 19. An important consideration of the committee inquiry is the identification of prevalence of learning disabilities in Northern Ireland. The Bamford Action Plan for 2009-2011 estimated that there were 26,500 people with a learning disability in Northern Ireland. This is based upon an estimation of between 1 to 2% of the population, and that's on based upon national and international studies have estimated that between 1 to 2% of the population will have some form of learning disability. Based on this estimate and the population data for the 2011 census, it was estimated by RAISE that in 2011 there were between 18,109 and 36,217 people in Northern Ireland with a learning disability. However, there's a great variation in statistics regarding LD prevalence in Northern Ireland, and this is reflected within the Bamford Review itself, which also found it difficult to secure accurate information. A major shift in Northern Ireland services for people with learning disabilities or mental ill health was introduced in 2007, following the publication of the Bamford Review. It called for a number of changes to the system, including a continued shift from hospital to community-based services, development of a number of specialist services to include children and young people, older people and those with addiction problems and those in the criminal justice system, and an adequately trained workforce to deliver these services. And further developments regarding it under the 2012-2015 Bamford Division Action Plan, a number of broad actions have been developed, including consideration or support for children in school and for young people going through the transitions process. OFM-DFM introduced its own strategy on improving the lives of people with disabilities in 2013, reflecting the Executive's commitment to delivering the requirements of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The strategy has two goals which are of note to this presentation. These are transitions to adulthood, in which every young person with a disability should lead a confident, enriched life and be given appropriate support to make a seamless transition to a fulfilled adult life in which they can participate socially, politically, culturally and economically, and in employment and employability. Under this goal, it was to improve the opportunities for people with disabilities in the labour market by providing appropriate support, advice and skills development to enhance employability, and thereby obtain, retain and progress in employment, whilst also supporting employers with the provision of targeted information and practical guidance. Support for people with learning disabilities who have left the secondary school system is provided mainly by the Department for Health, Social Services and Public Safety and by the Department for Employment and Learning. In 2011, the DHS-SPS carried out a review of the provision of health and social care services in Northern Ireland. It made a number of recommendations on the future shape of services, making a number of proposals including further development of a more diverse range of age-appropriate day support and respite and short break services, development of information resources for people with a learning disability to support access to required services, advocacy and support for people with a learning disability, including peer and independent advocacy, and a commitment to closing long-stay institutions and completing the resettlement process for 2015. In order to meet the needs of people with learning disabilities, the DHS-SPS uses service frameworks to provide clear standards of health and social care. The Learning Disability Service Framework has 33 standards in a number of areas, including entering adulthood, inclusion in community life, and communication and involvement in the planning and delivery of services. The Department for Employment and Learning itself provides support for people with learning disability in three main areas. These are further education, higher education and employment. The majority of its services are targeted at developing skills and finding employment. In Northern Ireland, further education colleges are responsible for determining their own provisions and adjustments to support people with learning disability to access courses. DEL facilitates this via the Additional Support Fund, which is intended to help colleges meet the additional cost of provision for these students. In 2013-14, £3.5 million worth of ESF funding was provided by DEL and could be used for a range of supports, including specialist tutors, support workers and technical support. In terms of higher education, Access to Success is the DEL strategy for widening participation in higher education. Whilst there is no specific provision for those with learning disabilities, there are 4 actions pertaining to the wider grouping of those with disabilities, which would of course include those with learning disabilities. These actions include the Department engaging in a longitudinal study of educational attainment to identify patterns of disadvantage when applying to higher education, and the Department working in partnership with universities, FE colleges and employer representatives to increase the number of enrolments in foundation degrees each year to 2,500 by 2015, with each of the 4 actions within the strategy identified in the paper, including consideration of provision for people with disabilities. There is also support provided via the Education Library Boards through Disabled Students Allowance. This provides 4 elements of support: non-medical help, specialist equipment allowances, a general allowance and travel allowances, and that's to support students who've gone to higher education to facilitate for any additional needs they have. The Disability Employment Service provides a number of training and employment services for people with disabilities. The service itself is designed to help employers recruit and retain disabled employees. It also provides practical and financial support to companies. The services it runs includes a job introduction scheme, which is for if someone finds a job they're interested in, it allows them to try out the job itself to ensure it's suitable for both the prospective employee and for the employer. The Disability Employment Service can also help employers meet initial wage costs. Workable NI is a programme that gives people with disabilities the opportunity of working in a variety of jobs. This can offer a range of support designed to meet the individual needs and again meeting the needs of the employer. And Access to Work, which offers practical advice and help in order to make learning disability people's working life easier. This provides communication and supported interviews, adaptation to premises, special aids, assistance to travel to work, and a support worker if needed. Throughout Northern Ireland, as well as the kind of higher level government support, there's other sources available, such as within the community and voluntary sector, and that's through services or organisations such as MENCAP, Bryson House, and the Orchardville Society. And that's a brief overview of the paper. If the committee's any questions, I'd be happy to.
Thanks, Owen. On table 3 of your pack, and it's just, I suppose it's maybe a minor query at this stage, is table 3. Yeah, table 3. Learning disabled persons within health trusts had contact. All the other trusts you're able to break down by age, apart from Belfast, whereas there's just a total unknown. Is there any reason, or?
I'd have to go back and check. I got a response from them, so I can go back and check the response. But I think it was just they don't track it as far as I know. But I'll check it and get back to confirm rather than.
If that is, okay. Disabled Students Allowance then being managed by Education and Library Board. Should you figure or total in that per board, or is it variable?
I don't, but I can try and get one for you. That's right.
That's just Pat.
Thanks, Chief. Well, it's certainly a good report. There's a lot of information here. We'll have to be, it'll be useful as we proceed through the report. I find it concerning that we haven't identified definitively the number of people with these. On the one hand, we have Bamford in 2009-11 telling us they're 26,500. And then we have the census ranging between 18 and 36. That's alarming that we can't definitively tie that down.
Yeah, it's partially because it's one of the reasons why I contacted the HSSPS to see if they had more accurate figures. What they were able to provide was people who were in contact with the Health and Social Service Trusts regarding issues they were having if they had learning disabilities. It's partially part of the problem that was identified is that occasionally you'll find people who aren't aware that they have learning disabilities, especially people with very mild learning disabilities, stuff like minor or very mild dyslexia, may not be aware of it and may develop coping mechanisms over time and mightn't be aware that there is support available for them out there. The 1 to 2% estimate of the population, again, it's not highly accurate, but it's what's been used kind of internationally. And again, within Bamford, it was highlighted that this was an issue, that there wasn't any specific identification of people with learning disabilities. In some attempt to try and narrow it down, I looked at the number of pupils with special education needs. Again, there's issues regarding that because on the 1 to 5 that are there, you'll have pupils who initially will start off with a stage 1 special education need, and they may grow out of it or they may develop mechanisms to deal with it, so they may not necessarily still have that level of educational need once they leave the educational service. So it's...
I suppose where we came in from the committee's perspective, it was in the context of there was a growing lobby of parents and community and voluntary groups telling us that this post-18 or 19 lobby was about children who have moderate or severe learning difficulties who were leaving the education system, and the parents were feeling they were abandoned then by the state. So one would imagine that there must be a true reflection even in education terms of the numbers, either through a statement or some other process that have that. Can we tie that down? Also, I would be very keen, and the chair has alluded to it, student support. There's a figure in my head, for example, that tells me that somebody with a learning disability is 4 times less likely to secure work. You know, can we determine, because I'm reflecting on the Needs inquiry and the difficulty we had over getting data and information, and I see this, it's like deja vu here, not being able to secure the information to accurately reflect the background of the circumstances. So, and I know universities would appear to be doing a reasonable job in widening participation. Can we get those figures over recent years of participation? And that's the Open University as well, and many people with learning disabilities are there. And can we find out, you know, if we have a figure of, say we take the Bamford one as being an accurate one, say nearly 27,000, do we have any idea how many of them are in employment?
No. What I can do is I can put together a statistics paper around it,
Yeah.
and pull together as much as I can on employment, training, as much as I can on prevalence rates, and that way try and identify is there a coherent monitoring of it. And
Sorry for bugging you on, but no.
no, it's grand. No, it is something that you notice whenever you're looking at the paper, that there is a lot of vagueness about the stats around it. So
I think the community and voluntary sector, those groups that you named, are likely a good source of information as well. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Stanley?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for your presentation, Owen. My question is very similar to Pat's, in that obviously we need these figures if we're going to plan for services.
Yep.
And it said, was it 25,000, whatever there? Say that's 10% out or 20% out. You're talking thousands of young people here. And the other thing is that I've been involved with the group of this past 4 or 5 years with ASD, the autism spectrum disorder. And when we started first, we had about 6 families. This is an estate in Belfast, now up to nearly 100 families. And the reason why is that they're actually detecting more young people are being diagnosed. So there's one section of the people that we're talking about when I think there's probably a growth in that, because people are now aware of the symptoms and some of the aspects of autism. So, Chair, I'm just wondering, taking Pat's point, this is a very important aspect of this. That we're talking about huge amounts of money here. That we may not put aside because we may not have at this stage we don't have the figures.
what I can do as well, just whenever talking about it, I can take a look at to see if other regions in the UK are tracking, or if there's somebody that has a system
That's a good
tracking, so
idea.
identify and see if there's something there. So
Okay.
it'll give an idea of what's possible.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Stanley?
Yeah, Chair, it's more or less on the same point. 26,500 with learning disability, and there's knowing how many of those has fallen through the net in a sense, because there's been no provision for them whenever they've come to maybe 19 and have left, to move on. There's no provision for them to get into employment or to go into further education or whatever. And it's knowing if we can get the figure of how many of those have fallen through a net because there's been nothing there for them. And I think if we want to, get our teeth into this, we really need to know those figures and we can get them.
Fra?
Sure. And I think there's obviously quite a number of valid points. Thank you for the presentation and the document. It's very interesting. And I think Sammy touched on a fairly valid point, and that is that the community network that exists within there is. Some parents may realise that their children are having difficulties, may only come to light when they hear of a group looking after autism or something else, and approach them. And I think one of the difficulties I think that we had picked up when we were over in Glenveigh, and Pat mentioned this whole question of statement, and that as young people go through lives, I've dealt with cases where children and young people are heavily medicated going to school, and because of that, that the person in the school has the responsibility of identifying it, can't identify the true extent of the thing because the children or young people are medicated. And it's obviously trying to identify good practice elsewhere, because I think you're right, there may be thousands of people who have fallen through the net, and that's how we can deal with it. And I don't think you can properly carry out an inquiry unless you're dealing with the facts and the figures that are fairly accurate and allow you to move the thing forward.
Okay, thanks for that. Bron, do you want to come back on that one?
Well, I suppose in terms of if the committee looks at Table 1, which is from the initial kind of the review of report from Equal Lives, which is part of Bamford, it identified 16,366 people, and again that's based on HSC Trust data. But one of the comments made was that, as you're saying, it only represents part of the figures, because it's people who have approached the Health and Social Service Trust. So it's what they estimated, Bamford estimated that there may potentially be 16,000 more people with learning disabilities who haven't approached. So again, just to make the point, there's slight gaps regarding what's available, and it depends again on what level of disability people have or learning disability people have.
Bronwyn?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for your presentation. It's a good paper, and a lot of good questions asked here at the committee. People ask, how many of those people have went into employment. Looking at the Scottish model, it talks about, it is difficult getting employment, but equally as well, where people with disabilities have got employment, they've left because of bullying. I think that's something that we need to factor in as well, which is important.
Owen, do you want to go into your second paper then?
Sure. The second paper I'm going to discuss today is on models of support for people with learning disabilities after they've left the secondary school environment. The paper discusses approaches taken in 4 countries, and that's Scotland, Sweden, Canada, and the USA. In 2000, the Scottish Government published a 10-year strategy called The Same As You, which was designed to meet the needs of people with learning disabilities. It had 29 recommendations and proved to be highly successful. Scoping study 10 found that there was a shift in the balance of care, with greater local coordination and considerable development in the legislative framework. In June 2013, the Scottish Government updated this strategy, making 50 additional recommendations. 13 of these were in regards to issues concerned with this paper, and included recommendations such as education authorities must exchange information with other agencies to inform their plans to support the young person, and young adults with learning disabilities should be given the opportunity to use further and higher education to learn skills that relate to social skill developments, daily life skills and continuing education. A key part of the implementation of the strategy is the Scottish Consortium for Learning Disability. This is a centre of excellence established following the Same As You review. It provides a range of services, including training, research and consultancy, and runs a number of projects such as promoting supported employment and increasing innovation and diversity in what is available for people directing their own support. The SCLD is also specified in legislation to produce official statistics on people with learning disabilities. Under the Same As You, local area coordinators were introduced. These are specialised workers who help individuals and families navigate services based in local areas. In 2013, there were over 80 local area coordinators in 20 local authorities. They provide information, signposting the services and promote independent living. These services can, however, vary between local authorities. The second country I'm going to look at is Sweden. In Sweden, the central government establishes guidelines and policies for support for people with disabilities. Government agencies are then responsible for specific aspects of these policies. In some cases, these rules are further disseminated with municipalities taking responsibility. Government grants are provided in order to deliver these services. Implementation of this is handled by a number of agencies, including the Swedish Agency for Disability Policy Coordination, otherwise known as Handisam. It's tasked with accelerating the implementation of government policy and has 3 main tasks: promoting the strategic implementation of disability policy, providing the government relevant facts, and supporting accessibility. Handisam also works on a number of projects where Handisam gathers the views and experiences of children and young people with disabilities on the support they receive and how it can be improved. Other programmes include SARVIX, which is the adult education programme for people with learning disabilities. It's provided at both basic and upper secondary level and has the same curriculum as municipal adult education. Participants must be aged 20 years older and have a learning disability or acquired brain injury. Courses are provided at 3 levels. That's basic SARVIX, which corresponds to training school, basic SARVIX corresponding to compulsory school, and secondary SARVIX corresponding to secondary special school national programmes. An important aspect of the programme is that 15% of all teaching time must be in the workplace, providing practical experience for participants. It's also possible for people to undertake apprenticeships with work-based learning. Another organisation is SAML, which is a government-sponsored agency that is tasked with the creation of stimulating jobs for people with disabilities. This includes intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities and repetitive strain injuries. It matches people who have a functional impairment, which is their term, with appropriate assignments. It operates under a model with 3 phases. That includes an initial assessment, temporary rehabilitating employment and long-term employment in the mainstream employment market. SAML employs approximately 22,000 people across Sweden in 250 locations. Of these, 19,000 have disabilities and 1,000 additional employees. It offers employment in 5 areas, including cleaning and laundry, warehousing and logistics, workplace and property services, elderly services and manufacturing. The third country I looked at was Canada. This is one of the most successful provinces in Canada in providing support to people with learning disabilities is Ontario. In Ontario, schools are obligated under Bill 82 to provide special education programs and send pupils, with each district school required to appoint a special education advisory committee to provide input on the particular needs of pupils. The Ministry of Education also receives advice from an advisory council on the establishment and provision of special education programs and services. Specific higher education programs which provide support for students with learning disabilities include the University of Guelph's Universal Instructional Design, otherwise known as UID. This is based on Universal Design for Living, a model which provides a blueprint for creating instructional goals, methods, materials and assessments that work for everyone. Not a single one-size-fits-all solution, but rather flexible approaches that can be customised and adjusted for individual needs. UID at Guelph involved a number of changes to courses to ensure students with learning disabilities could receive the maximum value from teaching. This included aspects such as purpose-built websites for courses. In one case, for a clinical nutrition class, they designed a website to have distinctive graphics, provided course notes, databases, conferencing and up-to-date timetables so people were aware of any changes quite quickly. An evaluation of the programme found that UID had a positive impact on the learning environment. Students had greater confidence in their abilities to succeed, and student performance itself increased. In order to introduce these services around Canada, or around Ontario, there is a group called the Developmental Services Ontario. This was created as part of a wide-scale change to Ontario support for people with learning disabilities in 2004. Its main goal is to help adults with developmental disabilities find services and supports in their community. There are 9 DSO agencies across Ontario, helping people with learning disabilities access support in the community. It provides a number of services, including community participation supports, person-directed planning, and adult protection service workers. The final country I'm going to discuss is the USA, which has enshrined protections and support for people with learning disabilities within legislation. In addition to this, a number of organisations and government bodies work to support people with learning disabilities. These include the Office of Disability Employment Policy, the National Centre for Learning Disabilities, and Disability.gov. And Disability.gov is a web portal which provides information for people so it's easily accessible for anyone who has issues or concerns regarding learning disabilities or disabilities. In terms of legislation, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act includes provisions to ensure transition services are available to those that need them. IDEA transition planning services must begin no later than the first individualised education programme, which is effectively at age 16, and must be updated annually. The USA has implemented a number of projects and programmes to support the system of transition. One such programme is the Youth Transition Demonstration Project, otherwise known as YTD. The project is run by the US Social Security Administration and was developed to provide support to young people aged 14 to 25 with disabilities in finding employment and accessing other services. It's intended to empower young people and their families to be more proactive in their approach to the transition from youth to adulthood and by creating integrated coordination systems. Services provided include individual works-based experiences, youth empowerment and family supports. 6 US states participated in this programme, which commenced in 2003 and was completed in March 2012. Participants on the course showed increased earnings and employment, but marginalised workers moved into employment, and they're expecting further benefits from it in the long term. As the course completed, that there will be additional benefits to it. On a federal level, the USA provides a number of supports for adults with learning disabilities. These include the Life Skills Programs, which are post-secondary training programs for people with learning disability in need of additional support to encourage independent living, and are generally provided in a residential setting, and the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. The AIDD is a division of the US Department of Health and Human Services. It provides financial and leadership support to organisations in each state to ensure people with learning disabilities and their families can participate and contribute fully in all aspects of community life. The final area I'm going to look at is supported and integrated employment, which is something the committee may be aware of from the briefing that was received from the Disability Employment Service recently. In the USA, supported employment has been an essential part of support for people with learning disabilities since the early 1980s. Indeed, between 1987 and 1990, 1,400 supported employment programmes had been authorised in 27 states. Supported employment itself is defined in legislation and supported by federal and state funding. A major strategy in regards employment for people with learning disabilities and through supported employment is Employment First, which supports people with learning disabilities into employment. Under Employment First, community-based integrated employment is used by employment services to meet the needs of young people and adults with disabilities. It promotes integrated employment, whereby people with disabilities, including those with learning disabilities, are employed in a typical workplace setting. The policy behind IE operates on the principle that programmes and services should presume that all people can work and that work outcomes are expected. As the paper shows, there's a wide variety of support systems have been identified, including helping people into employment, identifying the needs and interests of people with learning disabilities to ensure they find training and employment they've an interest in, and ensuring there's an effective transition from school to a post-secondary setting. And if the committee has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. Owen, is there any reason you didn't look to our closest neighbour in the Republic, or is it something you could have a look at for us?
There was a number of, whenever I was looking at, where is it? Basically, there was a study I found that said that Canada, the USA, the UK and Sweden are very good, so those are the ones I focused on.
Right,
However,
okay.
speaking to a few people with in regards to the Republic of Ireland, they also have a fairly extensive supported employment system. They have a group called CARE in the Republic that are quite high up and are promoting the programme. If the committee's interested, I can certainly...
Could you please, I think it would be just get a good comparison there. Just in the Swedish model, I was looking, the Sam Hall, I think, which employed 22,000 people direct, and they seem to be a subcontractor, your paper cleaning, laundry, warehousing and logistics. Because they're a government or state-owned company, are you aware, do they get state preference for state contracts, or are they competing on a competitive...
I think they're competing competitively, but I can certainly take a look and confirm for you. I know that because they're state-owned, they do have targets put in place by government that they have to hit. It's in the paper. Yeah, but I can check for you, certainly.
No, it's just to be curious, because it seems quite a government-led initiative, really, there to put everybody into employment. Of the four countries you've looked at, do you see any comparisons to Northern Ireland, either in size or demographic, or what would be the closest comparison to ourselves of those?
Well, I suppose in terms of historical developments, in terms of how the systems have developed, would probably be Scotland, because they've had a lot of the similar legislation. But one of the reasons I included Scotland was because they have a fairly long-term programme that they've had in place since 2000, where they have put in an awful amount of reforms, and it was a good example of how they've changed their system to develop it. And the things like local area coordinators seem quite interesting in terms of how you can coordinate services locally for people, so that people can be signposted to programmes or information that they may need, so that there's that kind of higher level coordination for services, so people aren't left looking for things from multiple avenues. They can go to one person who can provide information.
Okay, members? Okay, Owen, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your presentation. Members, on to follow up then, I will underway there with some additional items to that, just to do so we have a good finding for it.
I was just talking to Sammy there, Chair. Wouldn't it be beneficial for the committee to go and look at some of these areas that are providing such a good service?
I think we'll have list of the best fit to Scotland.
Yeah.
That would maybe be, or are you thinking further afield?
That's Chair's discretion.
Some good models in the United States.
I love Boston, I can assure you. No, I think maybe we'll see when the paper comes back with the Republic, or even Scotland or the Republic might be, or even a comparison for the two might be something. Yeah. Quite that one too. Yeah. Yep. Okay, members content. Moving on then, agenda item 8, the departmental briefing on the update of the review of initial teacher education infrastructure. Can I just welcome Mrs. Nuala Kerr, Director of Higher Education for the Department of Employment and Learning, and Mrs. Carol McCabe, the Head of Quality and Initial Teacher Education Branch for the department. Ladies, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you. Really glad for this opportunity to update the committee on the review of the initial teacher education infrastructure review. The last time we were here, we spoke of the appointment of the review panel and the members' international reputation and expertise working in the field of education, particularly at policy development level. We advised that we had asked for submissions from higher education institutions and from interested stakeholders. The intention was that once those papers had been received, the panel would have a detailed discussion with each institution and with a variety of stakeholders representing the broad range of issues raised in the submissions. Well, in the end, we got over 100 responses, and we have prepared a summary of the issues raised in the submissions, and are placing this on the department's website. All of the responses were passed to each member of the review panel for their consideration. One of the panel's first tasks was to provide an overview of the current developments in the field of initial teacher education provision, which represents best practice internationally. And we have a copy of that overview paper, and this paper and the summary document that I mentioned earlier was provided to all those with whom the panel met in advance of those meetings. The panel held meetings at the end of February, and a list of those involved in the meetings, I think, has also been provided to the committee. The panel made use of the submissions provided by the organisations to explore some of the issues that they raised in more detail. And the panel's view of the meetings was that they were positive and constructive. The information gathered from these meetings, together with the submissions, the analysis of international best practice, the findings of the Stage 1 Committee and the panel's members' own experience will now be brought together as the final report is being prepared. The panel aims to provide its report to the Minister by the summer with the options for consideration, and this will form the basis for further dialogue with the ITE institutions with a view to finding an agreed way forward. I would like to stress to the panel that not only were the panel's view of the meetings positive, constructive, the feedback that we've received from those who held the meetings is equally positive, and there were very positive comments received about the quality of the overview paper in terms of setting out what the key issues were. Chair, I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Nola. And the responses, I know, an international best practice, I suppose, has been a central plank to the review and the establishment of the international team. But a number of the submissions and your summary responses, the unique circumstances in Northern Ireland, in your feeling, does the international panel understand, or are they, aware of the long-term implications of the unique circumstances in Northern Ireland?
I believe there's a very good understanding has developed by the panel. Some of them already had some knowledge of Northern Ireland, and I'll ask Carol to talk a little about that. But certainly as they went through those review meetings with each of the institutions, they were putting on the table the kind of issues that you're talking about what the circumstances up here are that differ. And that certainly was a question that we offered consultees to specifically address in their submissions, and some did and some didn't. Carol, do you want to say something?
I mean, the panel was, to varying degrees, two members of the panel, particularly Professor Gordon Kirk and Professor John Coonahan, are very familiar with Northern Ireland and meet and visit here quite frequently. But the rest of the panel are also familiar and certainly made use of the information within the submissions and the meetings to become very aware of the uniqueness of the Northern Ireland situation and the issues that they need to take account of. So they were very familiar with it.
Of the 37, out of the 109 responses, 37 of them were schools. Do you have any further information on the breakdown of those schools? Were they from one particular sector or geographical area, or?
I don't have a breakdown with me. We didn't do a breakdown of looking at where they had each come from. We've just grouped all the schools together, the schools and the individuals and the representative organisations. But we haven't, if the committee wants, we could probably look at that, but we haven't actually got a breakdown of where the schools are from.
Timeline now going forward, where are you?
Well, our expectation is that the panel will take all of this evidence and information and put together a report for the Minister by the summer. and that would form the basis of his discussions going forward with the institutions and key stakeholders about what the options that the panel will put to him, whether they will form the basis of a way forward in dealing with these issues.
And one of the things we think we went back, the economic assessments that were done of both St Mary's and Stranmillis, how have they played into the panel's review?
Well, the panel has a copy of that Stage 1 report, so that they're invited to use that as part of the evidence base on which to develop the options that they will wish to administer.
As part, and I was aware they had the report as an evidence base. Is there anybody presented it to them? Anybody going through it to explain it to them, either the commissioners of the report or the
But we didn't give a presentation to them.
They have the report, and certainly any questions that they might have about it, we can answer those for them. And also, but the information from Stage 1 is one part of all of the other pieces of information that they will consider. So it will sit alongside the information that they've gathered from the submissions, the meetings, everything else. But they're very familiar with the content of the Stage 1 report and what it was trying to achieve, and also comments within submissions which may also have referred to the Stage 1 report. So there's quite a bit of information they have on that.
I suppose my basic question is, Carla, has it been formally presented to them?
It has been they have it as part of all of the information that they have, yes.
I'm not just as a document, I mean as a presentation, or have they been told?
We haven't done a presentation to them on the Stage 1 report, no, they just have it as part of the other information that they have too.
Thank you. Pat?
Good morning, Dylan. We did receive an overview of the national trends in teacher education from the panel. The key areas, or the entire content, was talking about curriculum, was talking about assessment processes, school improvement, and pupil achievement. If that being the case, why was this not a joint review by the Department of Education, given the key elements of it was all educational based?
In terms of our review, this is an area where, as you know, our Minister has a responsibility in terms of the structures. In terms of looking at those aspects of education, this was to provide a context for the panel, for them to sit the infrastructure review. So they looked at the wider perspective, looking at all of those issues, and then are going to focus in on the structural review.
I can't understand, Chair, when the entire content of the overview that we have been given was all relating to the education of students, pupils. Was there any discussion with the Department of Education and going forward in terms of this review, given the evidence we have of the content of the review?
We have kept officials in the department abreast of the developments of the review as it goes along. In fact, we're due to meet them next week again to discuss a stage of the review.
So I was just going to say, in the overview paper, we have drawn attention in the overview paper to exactly what you have described, Mr. Ramsey. We have said that actually the information in the overview paper does provide, it is the backdrop or the context, if you like, the international context for teacher education. And we've made it clear, and the panel made it clear in the paper, that actually it was recognised that it strays into issues and responsibilities which are the Department of Education, but it was necessary to provide that as a background to allow the panel then to focus its attention on recommendations which are purely about infrastructure issues and within our Minister's responsibility. So it was, if you like, broadening out the discussion on teacher education generally and internationally, but then allowing for discussion about that within the meetings, but actually allowing the panel to focus its attention on recommendations about structure.
Well, I note your wording strays. My reading of it, the entire content of the overview is reference to pupils' educational attainment, assessment, and pupil achievement. Look, let me park that, but I think it's something that we may come back to. Did the chairperson of the panel, Dr. Paul Salzberg, did he ask that same question, why it wasn't a joint review?
Well, I think the panel, certainly in terms of how they thought about they would develop this review, considered all of the aspects of it, but they took the educational attainment issues that you've described as the broad context in which they were working in, but they clearly understood that the task they had was to focus in on the structures.
Yes, maybe I'll ask again, Chair. If the panel had belief that it should be a joint review, what was your response to them?
The terms of reference on which the panel was commissioned to do this work was on terms of the structures, not in the wider context. So that's the basis on which they were invited to take up this project.
Okay, I'll ask again, Nuala, because did the panel ask, or did the Chair specifically ask the question, why was this not a joint review?
I'm
not aware
I'm
of
not
that
aware of
specific.
him having done that, and I'm not sure whether you have something in mind, but I'm certain the Chair and the rest of the panel were always very aware of our Minister's responsibilities, the Department's responsibilities, and the fact that the review was focused on structures. It did, as we said, need to look at the wider international context, but was doing that only by way of background so that it could then look at what structures were needed.
Look, maybe you could reflect on it, and if there was a question and a response, you could pass that on to us as well. The Chair referenced earlier international best practice, but I noticed there was no reference to faith-based international best practice. Is there a reason for that?
This is the best practice that we're drawn from is international in the broad sweep. You can see that it's quite a summarised document, but certainly the panel were aware of the faith-based issues that exist in Northern Ireland, and we're in the context of teaching in the international best practice to draw those together.
But it's similar to, I think, where the Chair was moving towards. But surely it was in the panel's interest to look at best practice on faith-based institutions, because that's primarily what we're talking about. Two colleges, St Mary's and Stranmillis, who principally are faith-based.
Stranmillis is not a faith-based institution. That's not the purpose of which it was established.
Well, we can disagree in that. You know, people would articulate an argument that Stranmillis have a very strong faith-based curriculum. But can I ask, you know, in terms of the University of Notre Dame is one of the leading universities in the world. Was that looked at in terms of its outputs?
It may well be that the overview paper doesn't specifically address faith-based education, but certainly what the paper is doing is trying to provide what's happening internationally in terms of teacher education. The panel also has taken account of all of the submissions which have come through, and many of those submissions, as you know from the summary, did also refer to faith-based education and highlighted some examples for the panel to pay attention to. Belgium, Switzerland, the example that you have given. There were other examples in the submissions which came through. So the panel is, whether it has provided it within the international overview paper, it certainly has taken account of the examples of faith-based education which were provided in submissions, and if any of those also came up in discussion with during the meetings.
They're not part of the papers, Carol. We have seen, Chair, so maybe those areas could be passed on to us.
Sorry, there may well be reference to it in the summary responses. There may not. There isn't, I know, in the international paper.
That's fine. I was looking at St Mary's site overnight at their website in terms of how they see the pluralist shared but principally faith-based. Of the submissions from the universities and from Stranmillis, what was the core message of their submission? In terms of, you know, we have an organisation such as St Mary's who very strongly are faith-based. Would you accept that point? So what was the submissions in relation to how they foresee faith-based institutions where it fits?
I'm not clear about who they you're
Well,
referring to.
I said universities. I said Ulster, Stranmillis and the Open University. What was their submission in relation to faith-based institutions?
Can I just say, in terms of the submissions which we received from the individuals, the schools, and indeed the teacher education providers. We haven't disclosed or got into discussion about what the content of those submissions, as those submissions were passed to the panel and for discussion between the panel and the institutions themselves. If an institution has chosen to make public what they said in their submission, that's absolutely fine. It's entirely up to the institution to do that. But we haven't gone into the detail of any submission with anybody other than the people who provided the content of the submission.
So at any point in the future, will you be providing those submissions openly?
Whenever we asked for the submissions, when we sought the submissions, we advised those who responded that we would actually be doing a summary report of the issues that were raised. We didn't at that time tell anybody that we would be publishing the full content of their submissions, and so it isn't our intention to publish those. We have made it known at the outset that we would produce a summary report, which is what we've done, and the summary report focusing on all the issues raised by all of the submissions. The individual submissions have all been given to each member of the panel, but we didn't intend to publish the submissions.
Look, I don't want to take any more time than the Chair has allowed me, but I find it extraordinary that in a public review such as this one, fundamental to the future of St Mary's and Stranmillis, that you're not prepared to share that information.
I'm sorry, Chair, but there are data protection issues here. When we requested these submissions, we made it clear at that stage it was not our intention to publish in detail. It may be.
I don't understand data protection in these circumstances. Data on what?
The individual, we believe it would be possible to identify individuals or individual schools if we published our individual submissions. So we would have reservations.
Chair, just for the record, I would like to get a legal opinion on why this information has been withheld. I really would, and I want to get further information on it.
So can I just say as well, there may well be arrangements we can make with the committee and the committee members about the submissions. We certainly, as I was saying, it wasn't our intention to publish the submissions on our website or make those public, but I think we can talk to the committee about how, if you need to see the copies of the individual submissions. But as long as we're making clear, it's certainly, we may need to do that on a confidential basis, because we never sought permission, if you like, from the people who provided submissions to us about the content of their submission. And for that reason, we made it quite clear to them that we were summarising the issues that they raised rather than identifying who raised those issues. Now, if we need to perhaps talk to the committee about some arrangement about the submissions, which would be on a confidential basis, I don't think there will be a difficulty with that. It's more about us publishing them on our website.
Brad, just very quickly.
Sure, it's just the fact that the people who made the submissions specifically request that their submissions be kept private.
They didn't ask that, sorry. They didn't ask it, but because we wrote to them and asked them to sign something which said in their submission they acknowledged that we would be making use of the information provided in their submission for a summary report. That's what we asked them, and that's what so we didn't ask them, are you content to have it disclosed? We didn't ask that, and therefore they didn't need to give us or not give us permission on that. We made it clear we were doing a summary report.
Bad button, isn't it, I can tell you.
But if the department is willing to make them available on a confidential basis, if there are members want to take up on that, I think we can pursue that.
I respect that, Chair, but I don't think that's acceptable on a public review, that it's subject to only certain people can see it. I think that's unacceptable, but I'm leaving it at that.
I think it's the management for the department, maybe in future consultations, it's through the gate in this one. Sammy?
Thank you, Chair. I think it was on the 23rd of October last year, and during discussions I referred to some excellent examples, come back to Pat's point, of faith-based organisations, not just in the United Kingdom, but also in America and other areas as well. The panel of experts that produced this report have literally nothing to say about this. I know you said there may be other documents, but I'm going to record my own disappointment that I raised this issue there, and it's not even referred to, and it was one of my main points.
Chair, I acknowledge the point that you've raised. I mean, we've made the panel is completely aware of the faith-based issues that exist in Northern Ireland. they have had the opportunity to consider this in the context of international best practice, and they've also had this highlighted to them by a number of the submissions, and it's certainly they're aware of this as a consideration.
Yeah.
So that
But they haven't referred to it in this report, Nearly. It's not.
this is
The international trends paper doesn't refer to, you're correct, but we have passed to the panel, and I think references to the 23rd of October meeting with the committee are included in the summary of responses, and also the transcript from the meeting on the 23rd was also separately handed to the committee, to the panel members, and the references that you made in that meeting are have therefore been made aware of the panel. So it may not feature in the international trends paper,
Yes.
but it very definitely is part of the package of information that the panel is aware of.
Okay. Again, we had an opportunity to ask questions of Mr. Curlin, I think it was, from Grant Thornton. Will we have the same opportunity to interrogate or to question the present chair of the expert panel, Dr. Sulzberg, or Sulberg, whatever his name is?
Oh, certainly, if that's the wish of the panel, we'll give consideration to
Definitely,
that.
because these are the sorts of questions that I would like to ask him. The other thing, maybe this goes back to another point that Pat made. Is there a full list of the 109 responses? I think we only have 27 organisations here at the moment. Could you maybe elaborate more on that?
I think that would be, if you wish to see the individual responses, we'll share that with you at that stage.
In the summary provided, I think it's on page 1314, it talks about the unique political and religious history of Northern Ireland and the context-specific factors. How does your department, how does this panel of experts plan to reconcile the international trends with the, I suppose, the local realities of Northern Ireland? And certainly since this review has been commenced, I mean, we're in difficult times here, and for foreseeable future, I'm not saying that we're back to where we were many years ago, but we have specific circumstances here that many of those international countries wouldn't have at this point in time. So how do we reconcile these local issues with the international best practice?
I think that's a challenge that the Minister will be taking up once the panel concludes. I mean, the panel will review international best practice. They will look at the Northern Ireland context, and they will look at the structures that we have here, and they will be recommending a number of options to the Minister. The Minister will then give consideration to them, and it will be he who will take those forward and try and reconcile those parameters that you've talked about.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Sally. Bronwyn?
Okay, thank you for your presentation. In terms of options for change, why was the panel not asked to come up with recommendations? Does the Minister not want recommendations?
We are asking, the panel will produce a report which will include a number of potential options for the Minister to consider, and then the Minister will take those forward at subsequent to the receipt of the report.
No recommendations from the panel? Did the Minister ask the panel to come up with recommendations?
Panels always asked to come up with options, and the next stage, once the Minister had received the report, would be for the Minister and his officials to engage with the sector on those options.
Okay.
And from that, something may emerge, but it was always about options.
Okay. In terms of agreement on change, who has to agree to this, and what organisations will be involved in agreement to change?
It will the Minister will receive the report with the options that the panel puts to him. The Minister then will take forward the discussions with that. He would wish to reach conclusions that were agreeable to the key stakeholders and the institutions themselves. So it will be dependent on what the structures eventually evolve, and what conclusions he reaches on the fit of the report and the discussions he has.
So all the stakeholders and institutions will be involved on a way forward, on agreement on the way forward?
Well, it depends on what the options that are put to the Minister, and then...
Depends on the options put to the Minister by the panel?
The panel will put a number of options in there. The Minister will consider the options, and he will decide what he wishes to do on the foot of the options that the panel put to him. And depending on what those options are, he will engage with the relevant parties to reach a conclusion on what is agreeable as a way forward.
The terms of reference does talk about, as Nuala said, I mean, it would be that the Department will then enter into further dialogue with various institutions about agreeing a way forward. So it will be how that works. And once the Minister receives the report, that would be the next stage then after that.
Okay. Thanks, Bronwyn. Chris?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for your updates. The First Minister has said that it's fundamentally wrong that we separate our children on the basis of religion at such an early age. And they had a report yesterday from the Integrated Education Fund in conjunction with the business community in Northern Ireland, which set out some clear views that an integrated education system would have significant support from the business community in Northern Ireland. Is there an opportunity for the business community to input or engage with this review at any level?
There was an opportunity for anybody to provide input to the review panel when we invited submissions from them. So it was a public request for information.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Ralph?
Sure, just a couple of points. Just to pick up on one of the points that Bronwyn had raised. To see when all said and done and the options are brought forward, is it the intention of the Department of the Minister to go back and discuss this with St Mary's?
It depends on what the options are put forward, what needs to happen next. So it will depend entirely on the options that are put to the Minister and how he decides to take them forward. So it will be a matter that he would wish to conclude on an agreed basis with the relevant institutions.
No, it's just probably when it boils down to it, what you're actually saying is no.
I'm not. No, my apologies, Chair, but we are not saying no. It depends on what options come forward, and it would depend on what way the Minister decides to take forward those options. There is no question at this stage of our ruling out a ruling in any individual. It will depend on what the Minister decides to do as on the foot of the options that are put to him.
You also understand from the very outset of this that many people believe that this is a smokescreen to move ahead and close St Mary's. And I think members of this committee have made that very clear from the very outset and the way the whole thing has been conducted. But
I'm aware of that, Chair, and I have to say I'm extremely disappointed that the committee considers that we're here engaged in a smokescreen. There's genuine effort being made on the part of the Minister and the part of the officials and the part of the panel to consider what is best for the children of Northern Ireland, and this is not a smokescreen for any other activity.
But I have to say, as an elected representative, I'm entitled to an opinion, and certainly the evidence that I've heard at this committee, not only this morning but in the past, does nothing to lead me in the direction to believe that there's not an agenda at work, certainly by the Minister, to see the closure of St Mary's at some time in the future. But
I can only reiterate, Chairman, that my view,
I don't think it's something you and Frost going to agree on.
no, that's it.
assurances that is not our intention.
And point 9, and that it said that there was a list of institutions that the panel was going to meet. Did the panel meet Collier and Gail Scully as part of that? And if so, why not?
No, the panel didn't meet. I mean, the list of organisations that the panel met is included in your paper. We have taken certainly many of the issues of Irish medium education were raised within the submissions, and also we have provided, as we have said, we provided the panel with them. We tried to accommodate as many, fit in as many meetings as we could over the days that the panel was here, and the list is as you have it. But the organisations that you mentioned haven't been included, but Irish medium education has certainly been included in the issues that the panel has considered.
Well, could you tell me who did you meet to discuss it?
To discuss
teacher training in the medium of Irish?
Well, it would have come up in many of the submissions, and it would have come up in many of the discussions with the institutions and the organisations that the panel met.
But you've met a number of key people in teacher education. To many people, the teaching of Irish is a crucial element of teaching them. So the panel have went to the bother of meeting other providers, but not those. And then St Mary's is actually one of the main providers of teacher education. Why were they not contacted or met with? Is it not important enough in the future of education?
I mean, I can assure you that absolutely every issue that was raised within the submissions or discussed in the meetings was considered to be important by the panel. And Irish medium education was a key feature in many of the submissions and much of the discussion that happened with the panel. So it very definitely was important enough and was something that the panel considered. The point I'm making is that three of the 4 institutions that's mentioned here is involved in teacher training. People have went to certainly to meet these. What I'm saying is that why was the Irish language, in terms of teacher training, not afforded the same thing of putting their thing forward, their position forward?
The Irish language, as Carla said, there were a number of references to the issue of Irish language communication in the submissions that were received. And as you say, St Mary's is a key deliverer of Irish language teacher training, and they were definitely one of the institutions that the panel met. So that our view is that the issue was raised with the panel in a serious and considered manner, and there was an opportunity to meet one of the key players in that.
Well, tell me, you're saying to me that the panel discussed the training of teachers for Irish medium schools with St Mary's?
I don't wish to. I'm not in a position to get into the detail of that. I wasn't present at that.
Well, could we have whatever information there is in relation to that, whether it happened or not?
And it's, I mean, as I say, it's recorded in the summary of the responses as an issue which was raised by many respondents, and they have considered that, and certainly they met. One of the key meetings was with St Mary's as well.
Well, my understanding is that it didn't take place. Now, that is just my understanding. And but if I could find out if a meeting took place and if the whole question of the teachers of the Irish medium was discussed with St Mary's.
What meeting? Sorry, there wasn't. I was saying that there wasn't a separate meeting. No, other than the list that you have.
That's the point that I'm.
Sorry, no, the list that you have, and if you don't have it, I can provide it. There wasn't. The panel met with all of the people provided to you in the list, and the organisations that you mentioned were not included in that, and for no reason other than, I mean, there was many references to Irish medium education in the responses and in the meetings, and that's what the panel has taken into account.
The purpose of the meetings with the institutions was for the panel to consider further the issues that were raised by the various institutions and to explore them further. And those are the opportunities that were afforded all of the HEIs to raise the issues that they had in their submissions.
But also, let's say, just picking up on that, from where I'm sitting from here, you discussed with the key institutions all aspects of education. The key provider of Irish medium education, which is St Mary's, that there was no discussions took place. For many people, that is a key aspect of education, and that is learning and teaching in the medium of Irish.
Rob, we have St Mary's and Stranmillis on the 4th of June in front of us, so you'll be able to ask them direct. Deputy Chair Tom.
Yeah, just one issue, because there's been quite a bit of debate around this morning. When the options from the panel are put before the Minister, for the Minister to consider, will those come to committee? Will committee get a view of those and get an opportunity to discuss those prior to the Minister making his final decision on them?
The document will be published in due course, and of course the committee will be afforded the opportunity to see the report before it's in the public domain. In terms of, we haven't mapped out that next stage, but in the normal course of policy development, we would be talking to the committee. We've done our best to keep the committee abreast of what of what's happening to date, and we will continue to do our best to do that.
Well, I think that should be reassuring for members that if they're going to see a copy of the options that's going to be recommended by the panel to the Minister, prior to the Minister making up his own mind on it, at least if we can get a look at it and see it then, that may well reassure some of the committee members here.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Okay. Neil, I suppose, Carol, just Neil, you did say there, that section has been mapped out, and I now formally request that that document is brought to this committee, and whether it's yourselves or where it's the Minister comes in front of us to explain his options and where he's going to go on it before we go any further than that, because I think you can see from around the table there is quite a number of concerns over this area, and just by listening to members, I think we'll forward today's Hansard as well to the international panel, and also we will be inviting the chair.
Yep.
If he wishes to attend. I don't know if he wishes. No, he may not want to take up the invite, but I think from today's presentation, just for clarity and for our own members' sake, that we will extend an invite to at least the chair of the international panel to come up. So members are content with that as a course of action.
We can ensure that we will receive the copies of the Hansard of today.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Okay, members content that that's a course of action. We do get that because it is something we need to keep a hand on.
Innocence in the hand.
I can stretch out, I mean, more. Okay, members, moving on then, agenda item 9 is the departmental briefing on the Work and Families Bill, and just invite Tom and Alan to. Just welcome Tom Evans, the Deputy Director of Strategy for the European Employment Relations Division, and Dr Alan Scott, Employment Relations Policy and Legislation Branch, both from the department. Tom and Alan, you are very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Members, just could mention there are mobile phones sort of enough, so just this session has been Hansard, so just be careful there. Briefing packs are page 415 of your packs. Sorry, Tom, Alan, over to yourselves.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity for further engagement with the committee on this policy area. You have in your packs a very detailed paper on, and also copies of the draft bill and the draft departmental response to the 2013 public consultation. I mean, just to say that all of the draft proposals, whether they get clearance from the executive, will be subject to both scrutiny by the committee and by the executive. The Minister has already recently circulated the executive papers and in advance of a formal consideration at an upcoming executive meeting. The Minister wanted the committee to have sight of the proposals, so that in the right around to executive answers, we will obviously feed back any comments that have been made by various executive or by the committee. As I say, if the executive do give it its approval, the bill will be introduced and obviously the committee will have a further opportunity at committee stage. And again, just to say that we're keen to support the committee as you deem fit. The committee was briefed in May and September of last year on basically the scope of what the consultation was about, and then we did give an overview for the main responses. There were 32 responses to the consultation, and Chairman, if you're happy, I'll just give a sort of a brief overview and highlight the key aspects of the paper.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Basically, what the paper is setting out is what the draft bill will propose to do. I mean, what the bill will seek to do is to create a new entitlement for employees to be absent from work on shared parental leave. The bill will also permit qualifying birth parents, adopters and intended parents in surrogacy arrangements to qualify for shared parental leave. The bill also makes provision for intended parents in surrogacy arrangements to avail of paternity and adoption leave and pay. It also sets in place enabling powers to allow notice periods for paternity leave and pay to be equalised. It sets in place enabling powers which will allow for future changes to maybe the statutory paternity rights. And those are changes that are not forecast at this stage, but obviously as you continue to review the rights that are available to parents, that would allow that to happen. would provide for statutory adoption pay to be paid at 90% of the earnings for the first 6 weeks, creates a new right for employees and certain agency workers who have a qualifying relationship with a pregnant woman or her expected child and up to 2 antenatal appointments during the pregnancy. The bill also creates a comparable right for secondary adopters. The bill then creates a new right for primary adopters to take paid leave to attend to up to 5 introductory meetings before a child is placed with adoption. And finally, in terms of flexible working, the bill will make the right to request, and it's the right to request, available to all employees with 26 continuous weeks continuous service with their employer. Currently, that is restricted to people who have got parental responsibilities. It is, in terms of flexible work, it's the intention to retain the statutory procedure that governs those arrangements in GB. It is moved to a code of practice, but to be quite honest, Chair, all of the responses to the consultation said that they would prefer if the statutory arrangement was retained, so we're taking account of that. The bill also includes a new technical amendment necessary to facilitate the consolidation of the current range of working time provisions into the regulations. I suppose Chairman, we're using the bill here to do some of the department's business. Under better regulation, we established a working group which had all of the key stakeholders, representative employers and employee groups, to look at the working time regulations, because there are currently 11 sets of regulations, and I think one of the criticism that employers and employees, in trying to comply or operate the regulations, it was cumbersome. So there was a very, very positive working group that got together and have brought together a draft set of regulations that combines and consolidates all those regulations. This is not a policy change, but it is very much just about a consolidation exercise, but does require primary legislation to do it. There are a few points that the committee raised at the last time we were with you, and I thought it would be useful just to come back on those points. The Deputy Chair, Mr Ramsey, had expressed concerns about the potential impact of the proposals on small businesses, and on the back of those comments, we did include it in the public consultation. Our regulated impact assessment acknowledges that small business may experience a disproportionate impact, particularly where they have a lack of HR expertise, and that's probably the case right across the Book of Employment Law. But what the Department will seek to do is to put in place administrative arrangements that are intended to minimise burdens. We aim to mirror as far as possible the arrangements that are already in place for the existing rights, and so that employers who've dealt with apps will be familiar with those systems, and for employers with less experience there will be clear and comprehensive guidance of how to comply with it. The reality is that employee absence and leave is an important issue for small businesses. You know, it really can be a significant event in the working year, and the sharing of leave in many cases will actually benefit small business, which may see key staff returning earlier than would have been under the existing maternity leave rights. The Department will also be taking other steps to minimise burdens. Parents will be asked to give a non-binding indication of their expected pattern of leave when notifying their employer about their intention to take shared parental leave. This should encourage them to consider their plans from the outset and give employers an early indication of the potential leave pattern they can expect. This should encourage open and honest discussions between the employer and the employee. 8 weeks' notice of leave or changes it will be required to be given by an employee. Where agreement on the leave cannot be reached, the employer will be able to require the employee to take all of the shared parental leave as a single block rather than operating under multiple separate blocks. Multiple separate blocks of leave will suit many businesses, but not all. The Department also intends to limit to 3 the number of times an employee can notify his or her employer of leave or changes to the pattern of leave he or she has taken. And I suppose all of this here is to try and, as I say, minimise the disruption, particularly for small businesses who may not have a dedicated HR function. And all of these arrangements will actually come into force through regulations, and those will come in front of the committee, and that will be subsequent to the passage of the bill. So the sequence is the bill which will go through Assembly, go through committee stage, and if that is passed, then that creates the powers to make the regulations, Chairman, and then those regulations would come from the committee. It will remain the case that small employers are entitled to recoup 100% of any statutory payments they make, plus 3% compensation for the extra national insurance contributions payable. This compares favourably to 92% recovery entitlement for larger firms. The reality is that creating a separate system for small business could reduce their flexibility to negotiate with an employee on when leave is taken, deny them the opportunity to split the burden. So actually, by introducing more flexible arrangements, it can give small businesses an opportunity to manage the leave arrangements and work with the employees to negotiate leave arrangements that suit both parties. In terms of the right to request flexible work, and it's acknowledged that there can be a disproportionate impact on small business. However, employees only have the right to make the request once per year, and so they'll have to think carefully about how the employer can accommodate the proposed working pattern. And of course, with the right to request, ultimately the employer has the right to turn down a request where there are sound business reasons, and those are already set out in legislation, and those conditions will remain under the new arrangements. Another issue was raised by Mr Hillage. It was around whether enhanced flexible working rights can have a positive impact on absence figures, which is a very topical issue both in the public and private sector. We had drew attention when we came here in September to CIPD research suggesting that the right to request has a positive impact. And there is a body of research which suggests that flexible working arrangements can have a beneficial impact on absenteeism and indeed productivity. Also, where flexible working enables people to remain in work, there can be lower staff turnover with lower associated costs, and that's a particular issue for small businesses. A turnover of staff creates significant burdens. I've also already referred to the benefits of shared parental leave, which means that an individual may well return to work earlier than they would have expected, and again that can be helpful in helping both the employee to engage earlier back in the workplace, and also it helps with continuity of employment. Chairman, the Department for Social Development and the Department for Health and Social Services and Public Security, they have there are provisions that relate to some of their responsibilities. So we've had ongoing discussions with lead policy officials about the public consultation, the draft policy response and the bill itself, and they are content with the bill as drafted. And as I say, we've continued to work closely, as we do anyway in the normal course of things in terms of our shared responsibility for maternity leave arrangements. That just takes us then to, as I say, to concluding remarks. I mean, this is an enabling bill which contains significant regulation making powers. As I said before, the key regulations will be subject to the conformity procedure, so there will be a separate opportunity for the committee and the Assembly to scrutinise and debate the contents. As I say, if the bill is introduced, there will be a committee stage, and again, we offer up our support to help the committee with that. Chairman, we're happy to take questions. Alan did an awful lot of the heavy lifting on this here in around the drafting of the instructions and working with the OLC, so as I say, we're happy to take questions.
Tom, thank you very much. When do you expect to be in front of the executive with it?
We're keen that the Minister's circulated the draft executive paper. We hope to get it on the next executive meeting, when that will be, and I'm not sure when that will be. And we have some, there's an urgency because we need to get the bill into the Assembly to go through its stages so that the arrangements are in place at the latest for April of 2015. And we are at this stage behind the UK government, who already have taken through I think it's the Working Families Bill.
That's right, and there's a need to cater for the possibility of, although the rights apply to babies that are expected in April 2015, there's a possibility, of course, that babies could be born prematurely, and the rights would be applicable to the mothers or the parents of those children. So we would hope to get the bill introduced into the Assembly ideally in April, because that will allow the appropriate period of scrutiny, hopefully, and possibly enable the regulations to be brought in ideally in November so that we can cater for those cases.
Okay, thanks. I suppose one concern that's coming out, and it's actually point 20, and that's in your comment, flexible working aspects of the bill have been drafted, therefore solely to remove the present condition that restricts the right to request flexible working to employed parents and carers of adult dependents, but the effect will be to make the right to request. And I suppose my concern is we've already enshrined in legislation that parents and carers of adult dependents have the right, but the new legislation will expand a right to request to everybody, but it will also remove the current legislative right.
It removes the restriction of that right only to parents and carers, so parents and carers will be totally free to continue to request flexible working. It just opens up the right to all other employees with the correct length of service, 26 weeks.
But can I guarantee, sorry Alan, that those employed parents and carers of adult dependents still have the legislative right?
Yes, they still will have the legislative right to request flexible working, but that will then be on the same basis as all other employees. So they will have they will have to approach a request through the same process. They'll have to put a persuasive case to their employer as to how the employer can accommodate the request, and talk to the employer about how that can be done. Follow the legislative steps that are set down, and there is a facility for the employer to turn down such requests on business grounds, but there's also an appeal facility so that if the employer does turn down the request, the employee can maybe rethink the options and see if there's a different way of accommodating them. But certainly parents and carers will have the same right as other employees, and it's a legislative right under the legislation.
So there's no change. They will see no change.
No change.
Okay. Tom, you mentioned then just in point 19 in regard to legislation on statutory guidance. Your point 19 says that non-statutory guidance rather than legislation will be used here and further in the better regulation. The Department has concluded that the process for dealing with the request reasonably is best supported through comprehensive non-statutory guidance rather than legislation.
This is paragraph 19, Chairman?
Yeah. Whereas I thought you, in your opening comments, you were actually saying something the other way around. No.
There's a statutory process that every request must follow, which involves the employee setting out the request and how they propose to work a flexible pattern, what that pattern would be, and the employer is responding to that. And as I said, there's an appeal mechanism, so that's the statutory aspect of it. The guidance would then supplement that by setting out examples of how an employee might be able to construct a positive request that the employer could consider seriously, and all the detail that would need to be included in that in order to maximise the chances of it being successful. So that would be the role of the non-statutory guidance.
Chairman, I mean, in GB what they've done is remove the statutory process that governs it, and it is now covered by an ACAS code of practice. And as I say, as it happens often with codes of practice with further guidance, the plan is that we will retain the statutory process that governs it and provide then supporting non-statutory guidance so people understand how the statutory process works.
Right. So there's been no change to the...
No, and I mean, it was both from the employer consultees and from people representing employees. They said statutory process works well. So, you know, we're always conscious if you get reasonable consensus about something, just because it's happening, change in GB, you know, an arrangement, we feel that it's reasonable to retain the process if it's something that is appreciated by all parties.
Okay, thanks, John.
Chair, back to your earlier point about parents or carers, I just want to be certain, because kinship carers are coming to the table now quite late in the night with a strong voice. Will that same principle in effect in law be for kinship carers?
Yes, under the existing provisions, the right of carers to request flexible working is restricted to near relatives or to someone who lives at the same address or to a spouse or partner. Under the new provisions, it will be available to all employees who have the correct 26-week length of service. So that would include kinship carers if they meet the criteria as an employee and having the right length of service.
Okay. Another point, in terms of from the original consultation that commenced from the Minister, whatever happened last year, has there been any changes to the proposed outline detail we were presented with?
The policy proposals? No. There's the administrative arrangements that will support it, that are set out in the paper. Those will be something that will be debated as part of the regulations.
And in addition, there is the new provision in the bill which deals with the working time regulations, and that is a separate issue, but it's essentially a technical amendment. That's something to which there has been widespread stakeholder agreement.
The final, it was more reflecting on the submissions that were made. Was there any diverse opinions in respect of the original proposals to enable some form of amendment to accept those?
We did make the responses available to the committee. The reality of it is, where I think there was adversity. Employer representative bodies say that there's a burden on business, and any opportunity to reduce that. But the regulation that will set out some of that detail will have to be scrutinised and debated. And what we're trying to do is to put in place clear, unambiguous arrangements that reflect broadly how things are operating now, because the last thing what we get even from employer bodies are don't dramatically change administrative arrangements, because we've got systems in place that work well. So don't introduce new radical changes to it where they're not required.
That's right, sir.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Alistair?
Thanks. Just on a more general point, I think there's an acknowledgement that any further regulations will be an impact upon small business owners, and we know that Northern Ireland, 90% of our businesses are small businesses. Therefore, there will be a disproportionate impact upon business in Northern Ireland compared to the rest of the United Kingdom. I think that's something we all have to be mindful of. On the general point, obviously the Deputy Minister in December launched a review of red tape, and the Prime Minister in January talked about how he wanted to remove 3,000 regulations, either remove them or amend them to make life easier for small businesses. Within the department, can you give us any guidance in terms of what work is ongoing to remove regulations that are currently upon small business owners, either that the legislation in place is now redundant because of changing circumstances, or it's unnecessary? Because I think in order for us to sell it to small businesses that this is a good piece of legislation, we also need to show that we appreciate that there is a burden upon them. So if we can say that the department is working on removing some of the burden, then it's an easier sell. So can you give us an idea of some of the work that's going on to remove regulation elsewhere?
The Minister has a target in the economic strategy, which is to review all employment regulations in the lifetime of this Assembly. And actually the piece of work around the working time regulations, what we've done is, instead of us sitting back in Adelaide House or wherever working through this, what we've done is we've established project groups which have experts from both the employer and the employee side in those regulations to work with ourselves to look at the regulations. And I suppose the Minister hasn't got I think he's not explicitly saying about deregulation. It's the executive has come in to operate under a better regulation strategy, which, in some stages might say that there are some of the regulations are unnecessary, but it may say that some of the regulations are necessary, but the way in which they are drafted and cast aren't helpful for good business and actually aren't having the clarity that employees need. So under the working time, what happened was we looked at to see whether, and Chairman, we're happy to come back on the better regulation strategy at a future date. What came out of it was there was really no gold plating of the directive, other than there was the fairly minimum transposition of the directive. But what has happened was that there were 11 set of regulations which had evolved over the last 15 years, and there was a need to improve to consolidate them. But also, I think there was a very keen enthusiasm for the guidance that supports that to be of a higher quality. And so what we've produced is an at-a-glance guidance, which I think would be very helpful to small employers. And I mean, the Federation of Small Business was involved in that, as was the CBI involved in it, and they were actually in the lead. I mean, the reality is, we're not actually leading that, we're coordinating those pieces of work, because actually it's important. The trade union movement are involved, and the business groups. We did that went through that same exercise with the conduct regulations that govern employment agencies. And as I say, we will be actually writing to the committee. I think we have written to the committee about the proposal to go out to consultation on those. On the working time, it was purely not a policy change, it was about consolidation. The next stage will be to review what are the next set of regulations which are significant, which it's worthwhile having a look under the better regulation approach. So I mean, I'm pleased you've asked the question. Does it mean, I mean, we could say, but I don't think it's a helpful presentational point to say, is that actually we've removed 10 set of regulations because we've one set, and I don't think that can seem to be an easy way of claiming removal of 10. What we've done is consolidated it into an effective one single set of regulations with effective guidance, and what we want to do is take that through, and we'd be very happy to share all that with the committee whenever the committee feel they're ready to consider that.
That'd be useful. Thank you.
Members, no one else? Tom, just I suppose one point, and something Alan touched on, is point is really in timeline in the committee's work in regard to this. I know you said you would be fully supportive of taking the committee through the legislative process, and I appreciate that. It's just one thing I would like to make you aware of, and I'm aware of your timeline, looking to April 15. But I just want to let you know now that because of the nature of this legislation and the detail of it, I don't intend for it to be rushed through the committee stage at this point of view, unless there's a very, very valid reason, because there's some of them occasions, although are beneficial, there are something that may have a detrimental effect as well. So we will be taking we won't be delaying it, but we'll be taking our time going through it, and that's when we will be looking support from the department to do that.
Well, as you can see, it's a very substantial bill, Chairman, and we understand that, and we take the point you're making.
Yeah. Okay. Members, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members, just to make you aware, I suppose the committee staff already have drafted a press release is tabled at page 23 for when the bill does come, so it's just there if you're content with that. And there's also signed posting, and members at page 568 of your pack is a draft list of consultees that the committee will be writing to, and if there's anybody you want to add to that list as well in regards to the computer laid down, hasn't it? All right. Okay, members, and also there's just a signpost and advert then at page 569 of your packs as well, but that's really just to get as much as the committee can do in advance of the legislation coming forward.
Well, the reason why we're getting this cleared by us now is just in case committee second stage comes, and then immediately second stage is committee stage, and say we don't have a meeting, it means I can go ahead and organise it and get it out into the papers.
Okay. Members, are you agreement for the draft signpost advert and the draft press release? So they can be issued. Okay, members, we are waiting on NISRA officials. While we waiting the computer starting up. Members, just then while we are waiting on that to kick in and the officials to come in, point 10 of the 12 of the agenda. Is there any other business?
To do the thing.
I'll stick it on to you.
All right.
Okay, members, if there's nothing under any other business, just welcome Dr. James Gillian, the Head of Economic Statistics Branch, and Dr. Tracy Parr, the Deputy Director of Analytical Services, to present for the NISRA Quarterly Labour Market Statistics. Members, we're waiting on, it'll go on again, are we? Just in the laptop to kick in. Just, folks, if you have 10 minutes of a presentation just to the committee, then we'll go on to questions if that's okay. So, James, Tracy, over to yourselves.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair. As you know, we give you a written briefing in the intervening quarters. This is one of the face-to-face briefings, and it's appropriate as on the 19th of March we put out our usual monthly unemployment statistics, our quarterly employee jobs statistics, and two of our key output series, the index of production and the index of services. So it's a chance to take a bit of an overview of where we are. I'll just run ahead the slides to keep ourselves on time. We start with the usual Labour Force Survey unemployment rate, and this is the one that's based on the household surveys. About 2,500 every quarter are selected, and interviewers go out and ask people their economic status and reasons for inactivity, and this is based on the international definition. So the unemployment rate using that measure was 7.5%, and that's referring to the period November 2013 to January 2014, and that was unchanged over the quarter, 7.5%. In the previous quarter, August to October 2013, but over the year it was down by a full percentage point. So in November to January 2013 it was 8.5%, and it has now fallen to 7.5%. So that's on one of the key measures. It has dropped, and you'll see that on the screen. So now that has left Northern Ireland still higher than the UK unemployment rate, which is 7.2% for the same period. So I think we always say to you, it's best not to read too much into any one quarter's figures, and be better looking at the time trend. So this graph on your screens refers to the period from 1993 up to 2014, and the blue line is Northern Ireland, the red line is the UK, and draw your attention first of all to the trough in that, the lowest point, where in 2007 we had an unemployment rate of 3.3%. I suppose it's been a bit of over the last 4 years, it's been a bit of a mixed bag. You can see where the blue line touches the red line there. In November to January 2011, our unemployment rate reached a peak for that time of 8%. It then fell back to 6.5% in 2012. It then shot up above the previous peak to 8.5%, that's 1 year ago, and now it has fallen back to 7.5%. So it's kind of been steps and stairs, one step down and 2 steps back, sort of thing, or forward. But it's one key measure that's showing for the minute. We haven't still above the UK, but there's an improvement throughout most of 2013. We move that on then to look at the job seekers allowance, or the claimant count measure, which, as you know, is the more timely measure, and it's a census of everybody that's in receipt of unemployment benefit. It was we had an estimated 57,800 people, which was down 700 over the month to February 2014. So again, 1 month on its own, not terribly illuminating, but this is the 13th consecutive month in which there's been a fall in the job seekers measure of unemployment, and we're down 7,100 over the period. That said, we're still the second highest of the UK regions in terms of, and that hasn't changed for, I think it's 4 years from memory. So the graph shows you that picture relative to the UK, and we've seen some tailing off, but there's still quite a gap. Just to put how much we've, I suppose, recovered, from the low of about 23,500 in about August, September 2007, there have been added 41,400 people throughout to the high point in January 2013. When you compare the low point to now, we're about 34,000 have been added. So we've recovered about 7,000 people from the at 41,000 who went on to the claimant count, and that's about 17% of those people that we went onto the claimant count since 2007 have now went off it into jobs. So there's, in those terms, there's quite a long way to go to reach recovery. The next slide, something we usually get asked is why are the two measures of unemployment telling us such different stories? It's particularly in relation to the UK. So on one, we're just slightly above the UK rate and we're below it for quite a while. On the other measure, we're second highest of the UK region. So, I mean, the question is, which one should we be believing, I guess? And this graph attempts to explain that. I mean, the short answer that I would have given to this committee before is they're both measuring different aspects of unemployment. One is the internationally recognised measure, the other is comes from administrative sources, and on the administrative sources criteria might change, whereas on the international the criteria stay the same, it's objective. But this, I suppose, that I draw your attention to the red circle. That's our LFS unemployed. On the international measure, which have a total of 63,000 on it there, that's the 27,000 you can see one of the arrows pointing to, plus the 36,000. So that whole red circle is what the labour force unemployed is measuring. The blue circle is what the claimant count unemployed is measuring. So you can see that there's half of people in claimant count are measured on the LFS unemployment, 46%. However, the LFS unemployment measure is picking up some people that aren't on claimant count. So it's capturing a dimension of the unemployed that the claimant count measure wouldn't normally capture. And in a similar way, the claimant count measure is picking up those persons who are employed but are in receipt of job seekers allowance. There's a income threshold that allows you to do that. And they're also picking up about 7,000 people who are inactive but are in receipt of claimant count. So I suppose the answer is they're both measuring different aspects of unemployment. We tend to have more employed people who are in receipt of job seekers allowance, and that could be related to more part-time work or more lower paid jobs that kind of are inflating our kind of claimant count figures. So I was going to move on then to the business survey side of things and what it's. So we've two measures. We've got falling unemployment. On the third measure, the employee job survey, to which we go to businesses, we're getting a similar picture. I'm just concentrating on over the year. So over the year, we've had an estimated 12,300 increase in the number of jobs, and that's from December 2012 to December 2013. And 85% of that increase in jobs has been driven by the private sector. That's 10,490 out of the overall increase of 12,300. Again, it might be easier to see that graphically, just relative to the UK. You can see we've lost about 26,000 jobs from the peak, and we still remain about 3.6% below that peak which we reached in Q2 of 2008. And it looks broadly similar to the UK profile. Obviously, we had a much greater acceleration of jobs, and we lost more, proportionately more, but the trends are similar. It is worth noting that UK jobs have almost fully recovered to pre-downturn levels. So they're just 1% below their downturn, or their peak, whereas we're 3.6%. So again, relative to the UK, we've more to do. The next graph shows the public-private jobs, but I'm just going to pass over that fairly quickly. It just shows that private sector jobs are increasing more rapidly than public sector jobs.
The next two graphs are bringing in a fourth measure, which is more the output of industry, and we're looking at manufacturing here mainly. And this graph predominantly indicates that our manufacturing sector seems to be doing better than the manufacturing sector in the UK. And indeed, most of the growth in jobs was in the manufacturing sector, so it was up by about 0.3%, only about 2,500 jobs, but relatively it's better. Flicking on then to the index of services, you can see we're lagging behind the UK in terms of growth in our service sector. The recovery from the Q3 2009 is about 9.5, well, our fall from peak to minimum levels is about 15%, whereas the UK is just slightly off its peak. Sorry, the UK index is currently at its peak of 106%, and whereas the Northern Ireland index remains 12.6% below its peak. Okay, so that we've got, but both of those measures, index of production, index of services, have been showing increases in 3 out of the last 4 quarters throughout 2013. Slightly different quarters, but so those are 5 measures, all independent, that are showing throughout 2013 there's been progress. On the employee jobs, there's been growth in 8 quarters, going all the way back, but 3 quarters of that growth has occurred in I think it's the last 3 or 4 quarters. So it's been a much more, and if you look at the unemployment payment count, the rate of growth in the last 6 months has been many times the rate of growth in the first 6 months. So there does seem to be some acceleration in growth. I was going to flick briefly on to a publication that came out in November that relates to the earnings picture, and I won't go through this in detail, but it is just to draw members' attention to it. In terms of all employees in Northern Ireland, our rate of increase was 1.7%. For gross weekly earnings, compared to a UK increase of 417%. Our full-time growth was lower than in the UK, 0.5% compared to 2.2% over the year, whereas our part-time growth was higher, and the growth in public and private was broadly the same. So that's a bit of a whirlwind tour, Mr. Chair, but I was going to stop and sort of take breath there if there was any questions you wanted to raise at this stage. Or I have a couple of more slides that go into some of the groups that might be of more particular interest to the long-term unemployed.
Members anything at this stage? Chair,
there's just one issue. I don't know where it falls into this sort of category or not, and it's agency workers who potentially have been laid off and are advised not to sign on in relation to benefits and that, because it would break their term with the employer. And it's practice what's happening in maybe some of our bigger companies. So I take it they don't turn up anywhere. They could be out of work for a month, but they don't turn up anywhere in the statistics.
On the business surveys, we go to the agencies and we ask how many agency workers they have on their books. So they are being covered. In terms of the household survey, will go to individual households, and it will ask them, have they been working in the reference week?
Right.
Have they been available for work, and have they been searching for work? So it will measure their actual state in that week, whether they're
irrespective of whether they're on somebody's books, it will ask them, are you working or did you do any paid work? So if they're on somebody's books and they didn't do any paid work, and they were available and looking for work, available or looking for work, they will be counted as unemployed. But I know there's been some evidence in when they were trying to measure the 0 hours contracts in ONS, the Office for National Statistics, there was kind of almost a reporting effect that, you know, they tried to measure it through the labour force survey, and the numbers on 0 hours contracts shot up, but it was almost a reporting effect. So I think the Office for National Statistics are looking at better ways to measure it, to try and separate out this effect. So I think there's plans afoot, and we're keeping abreast of those.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, John. Okay, James, we want to continue?
Yep. So I was just starting off with a slide on the long-term unemployed, and this slide refers to what percentage of the unemployed are long-term unemployed. So that's they've been unemployed for a year or more. The high point in terms of the peak share.
Sorry, James, I think we've lost the ring, but members are in
starting again.
It's your table packs, page 44, either on the computer
Slide,
pack or on the printed one.
Slide 19, is it?
Yeah, slide 18, but it's page 44 of our, yeah. Your slide 18 is long-term unemployment, the title page. So.
Oh, right. So the peak was in January to March 2013, which is kind of consistent with what we were saying previously, and that since then things have tended to improve. But at that time, 60% of the unemployed were long-term unemployed. That has now fallen to 47.5%, which is still, just under half of the unemployed are long-term unemployed, which is still quite a significant number. And you can see relative to the UK, they've just over a third of their unemployed tend to be long-term unemployed. So there's an improvement, but it's still very high. The next slide shows relative to the UK regions, and this is looking at if you like to call it, a long-term unemployment rate, and it's saying of the totally economically active, what percentage of them are long-term unemployed, and the blue bar there is 3.5% for Northern Ireland, which is the third worst of the countries and regions of the UK, so still remains an issue. Youth unemployment is on the next slide, which shows the Northern Ireland rate is 23.2%. The blue line compared to 17.6% for the UK, so still above the UK, but down slightly from the previous period, July to September 2013. If you look at our unemployment, then youth unemployment I should always make the point, this 23.2%, it sometimes gets misrepresented as 1/4 of all 18 to 24-year-olds are out of work. That's not what it's referring to. It's saying 23% of 18 to 24-year-olds who are economically active, that's either employed or unemployed, are unemployed. So it sometimes gets picked up by the press as 1/4 of all 18 to 24-year-olds are unemployed. So it would be a much lower figure if you were using that as your base. I've also included on the next slide just a bar chart of the distribution of the youth unemployed. Now this is measured by the claimant count or job seekers allowance measure, and that's showing that the Northwest is has got the highest rates in Derry, Limavady and Strabane. We're up around 14% in Derry. And then I was going to switch on the inactivity, which is, as you'll be well aware, is one of the highest of the UK regions. And it tends to be a permanent feature of the, I suppose, the Northern Ireland situation. Our inactivity rates remain very high. This is showing that there has been some decrease in them. So from the 16 to 64 in February to April 2009, we had an estimated 355,000. That's the peak of that blue line. And since then, it's fallen to about 311,000 of the inactive. And we've had so there has been some improvement there, but obviously, if you're leaving inactivity, some of that has been flowing into economic activity, and part of that is obviously they're flowing into unemployment, which isn't a particularly good sign either. So, of the flows off the inactivity, about 1/3 of them have gone into work, and about 2/3 of them have gone into a form of unemployment. And the numbers remain, I think, reasonably constant. So in 2011, we had 558,000 inactive, and in 2014, November to January, we had about 559,000 inactive. But I suppose the thing to remember is our population, 16 plus population, and 16 to 64 population, is increasing year on year. So in some ways, to keep the economically inactive stable is an achievement of sorts. So the next slide just highlights the relative shares of economic inactivity and employed, and it also draws the members' attention, that sort of green slice, that there are a share of the economically inactive who would like to work but are currently unavailable to work. So sometimes we describe these as potentially discouraged workers, and they're a part of the labour market that we should be able to draw on. The next slide I'm going to slip over pretty quickly, but it gives the main reasons for economic activity. You'll be familiar with our student population is about 27% of the inactive, followed closely by the by those who are describe themselves as sick or disabled, followed by the green area where people are looking after the family and home. So the next slide tries to control for that student population. So if you take the students out of it and you say, well, irrespective of the fact that we tend to have a younger population and a bigger share of students, what is it, if you control for that, how do the other reasons for inactivity, how do we fare relative to the other regions? So you can see fourth from the right-hand side of that graph, we have about the blue share is a reason given that people are sick or disabled is a reason for inactivity. So we're about fourth worst of the UK countries and regions. So Scotland, the North East, North West, including Merseyside, are ahead of us. But we still have a relatively large share looking after the family. So it kind of...
What exactly does that mean?
Looking after the family. I suppose people would ask, why are you not either available or looking for a job or employed? Say, oh, well, I have to look after my family. So it could be a carer, it could be minding the children, it could be as a housewife, or husband. So it kind of puts it in perspective. I mean,
depends. Sometimes it depends what way you cut this. You know, whether it's economic inactivity as a percentage of the whole working age population, we can look quite marked, but I think this puts it in proportion. The next area is we're going on to is NEETs, and I was going to hand over to Tracy from who's the Dell statistician to talk you through that.
Okay. I thought I would talk you through some important changes that have happened to NEETs numbers since we were last here 6 months ago. And I know that you've also heard from the officials in the department that deal with the Pathways to Success strategy on NEETs specifically. There's been a lot of work happening in terms of the definition of NEETs. As you know, NEETs are not in education, employment or training. Now, the education issue was kind of difficult to pin down for a while because part-time students were included in the definition or the counting of NEETs here as elsewhere because of the difficulty of separating them out. So recently, in the last year or so, the Office of National Statistics did a bit of work and a consultation on the definition of NEETs, and we're now at what we would consider to be a closer definition to what was originally intended in the Pathways strategy. So now we are counting people who are definitely not in employment, education or training. So that means that part-time students are no longer in danger of being included in the NEETs category. Now, I know the committee's interested in the NEETs numbers and you'd be familiar with the magnitude, which has been running at about 40 to 50 on the old definition. So I don't want you to be surprised now when you start to see figures that we're going to be publishing. James's team first published in February there last month, first official statistics in Northern Ireland based on this definition. And the number in Northern Ireland is now 29,000. That's the number of people that we know are definitely not in education, employment or training. You can see from that pie diagram there, about 2/3 of them are unemployed and the other third is economically inactive, which will include the people that James has just talked about earlier. Now, the real benefits of this definitional change is that we've got a tighter grip on the magnitude, which is around about 30,000, but it also means that we can do better analysis. Committee will sometimes have asked us about lower level geographies of NEETs and has been frustrated that we've been unable to supply it. Because of the LFS figures having a large confidence interval of plus or minus around 8% or 8,000 on the old definition, we could only ever disaggregate NEETs numbers by NUTS 3 areas, which are aggregations of district councils and not particularly useful at lower level geographies. So the important point about this new definition is that we can now match up to the census data by removing these part-time students so they're out of the equation. So the department plans to do, and we've already started to do a little bit of work on this, to look at lower level geographies in terms of assembly areas and district councils, and then also moving on to looking at the socio-economic kind of aspects of these individuals. So the kinds of things we'll be able to tell you are the qualifications they have, what kind of areas they live in terms of the deprived quintiles. So hopefully we'll be able to start that work and give you some detailed information on NEETs, which we've never been able to have before. The other thing about using the census, of course, is that people will say, well, it's out of date. We don't intend to move away from the LFS in terms of the overall number, and we will continue to come to the committee here and give you the number. Today it's 29,000. But the census will give us that extra breakdown, which will enable analysis at a finer grain of NEETs, which is a real benefit to the monitoring of the policy. So in terms of the table, the next slide just shows you the breakdown there of the NEETs, and then the next graph explains how that compares to the UK. One of the issues was that on the old definition, Northern Ireland never looked particularly positive compared to the other countries of the UK. On this new definition, by removing part-time students, we are on a par with the UK. In fact, in the last quarter, they're slightly lower What this means then, if you think about it, is that Northern Ireland had a higher proportion of its 16 to 24s in the part-time student category than the other countries, and by the removal it has equivalised us to the UK rate of around 13.5%. So I think we're now on the end of the presentation for questions.
Was Tracy just finishing on that last point? Have we changed the definition to improve our figures, or
Yeah.
have we just changed the definition to improve our figures?
We changed the methodology by which the LFS delivers the figures. There had been no official statistics published before. You were given figures as kind of our best guess, but the ONS have come up with a new methodology which allows a finer grained analysis of the LFS to take out the part-time students. So the methodology is definitely better and has been agreed by the four countries, and the ONS publishes data on that basis and has done for about 3 quarters now. So it is an improvement in the methodology. The fact that it has reduced the figures is a byproduct of that, and as long as we all understand that it's an artefact of the methodological change and not necessarily in these first few quarters an actual change, as time goes on, then we'll have that baseline information and be able to see when there are real changes.
And have the other 3, England, Scotland and Wales, have they introduced the same
ONS
methodology at the same time?
ONS published the UK-wide figures, but not by country. Wales have introduced this methodology. Scotland are still considering it.
Right, so when we're comparison to the UK,
That's the ONS figures.
that's the ONS figures,
Yeah.
isn't it? Okay, thank you. James, sorry, I think in one of the previous presentations we had with also a comparison about the over 45s as a different sector. Is it possible to get that?
Yeah, that's no problem. I don't have it with me, but we can make that available to them.
It's just the older persons commissioner has produced a report this morning in regard to the availability of older people for the workforce. So it was quite a handy tool for that, and they possibly going forward. So that would be beneficial. Very well, thank you. Tom, Deputy Chairperson.
Yeah, just looking at your figures, 18 to 24-year-olds broken down by district council areas, and it's good to get the figures broken down in the district council areas, but have you any indication of, for instance, I'm looking at Omagh, because it's the one that I'm most familiar with, have you any indication of the number of young people there that would have left in the last 12, 18 months to 2 years and gone away to the likes of Australia or somewhere else looking for employment? Because that would certainly make a difference to that figure if they hadn't left. But I'm just wondering, have you got any records or any indication of the numbers of young people that would have left and perhaps in some of these areas and headed away looking for work?
Yes, we keep we have a record of the reason for going off the count, and I think one of that is so we have found work, training and education, other benefits abroad and other. So we would be able to break that down. Now, I'm not sure at what level of geographical disaggregation we can go to in terms of, but I would anticipate that it should be available. The only limitation of this particular measure is, it's when people go off or don't come back onto the register. Some of them give a reason, but about just over a third don't give any reason. So I think that's the slide there. So you can see that red bar at the bottom. That's for Northern Ireland as a whole. The people in the Jobs and Benefits Office simply don't know why they haven't, re-registered for claim account. But I could certainly have a look at that for Omagh and for other district councils, if that
So
was
that's 4% there, James, of the 36 or 37,001 abroad.
Yes, 4% went abroad. So it might vary by district council, or you might be getting into very low numbers at a district council when it's, potentially disclosive.
Yeah.
To say how many went.
Okay, fair enough, yeah.
Members in, Sammy?
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for being late, James. There's a report out this week, I don't know how you've alluded to it or not, and it was the Monitoring Poverty and Social Exclusion by the Joseph Rowntree Trust. I think it was the name, the New Policy Institute. And I wonder, have you read that report yet?
Not the Rowntree one, no.
Right, yeah. Just, I was shocked at some of the figures, but they also talk about the total number of people in unemployment has risen, obviously with the rise in population. And this is about people in employment. It says increase among part-time workers since 2007. From 2007 right up to 2013, there were 27,000 more part-time workers in Northern Ireland. Is that put out in your figures?
Well, we have two ways of measuring it. One's on the labour force survey, and the other is on the quarterly employee jobs survey. So what we have is, since the decline, we've had about a 4.3% decline in full-time jobs, about 20,500 since 2007. And a fall of about 1,450. So part-time jobs have remained relatively steady, 34% between 2002 and 2008. It increased in 36% in 2009. Current levels about 34.6%. But that tends to be part-time. Full-time work is 30 hours or more. Part-time, there can be a lot happening below that 30 hours that we mightn't be picking up, but the labour force survey will give us the number of hours worked, so I can pick that up for you.
Okay. I'm happy to just want
Members, anybody else? Okay, James, Tracy, thank you very much once again. Okay, members, covered any other business earlier. Date and time, place of next meeting. No committee meeting next week. It will be a visit to Castle Tower Special School in Ballymena. There's maps and information included in your packs. And the next meeting will take place 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 9th of April, 2014, room 29. The committee.
I just checked about that visit to Ballymena. It's just I've been asked to do a thing. I think a number of MLAs have been asked to do a thing for Click Sergeant. I think it's at 12 o'clock. How long will the visit take us? Probably take us a couple of hours, wouldn't it?
A couple of hours. Okay, members, meeting adjourned.
Assembly, Committee Room 29.